Join me, Mark Windows, for Windows on the World live every Sunday 9 to 11 PM GMT. Check out our archive and programme stream at windowsontheworld.net. Now, we did several shows on what we call crime farming, which is where essential defence evidence is buried and the police and CPS, that's Crown Prosecution Services, push cases which would normally be too weak by omitting essential defence evidence. In my case, my evidence was blocked and evidence destroyed by Kent Police, which resulted in a 2-year engagement process with their internal gatekeepers. And I can say with some confidence that up to the Police and Crime Commissioner, there is no resolution within the police for complaints. The Independent Office of Police Conduct, which replaced the IPCC, is merely a gatekeeping exercise. In other words, it puts you back into the professional standards of the police. Now, the professional standards, in my case, blocked the evidence and worked as internal gatekeepers and openly lied. I had the assistant to the Chief Constable of Kent Police lying openly. I sent proof of these lies to the Police and Crime Commissioner, and they said it was an abusive process because the actual person who should have responded, which is the Chief Constable Alan Pewsley, had not responded, and he got his minion to respond, which he did at all times, a woman called Sonia Granston, who out and out barefaced lied. And I had the phone call which proved the lie, and I had the correspondence from her, and I put that in front of these people, and of course they didn't want to hear it. It's an abuse of their process because they are about abusing process. That is their job. I can say that with some confidence. And this resulted in a shocking revelation that the police were crime farming. Basically, we could say actually creating crimes out of cases which, if the relevant evidence had been put forward, would never have got into court. Now, here is an interview with someone who contacted Windows on the World following our show, which can be found in the Windows Picks section, and it's called Police Court Crime Farming. Now, this chap, Matt, contacted the show, and he had a very similar experience with Kent Police, and Kent Police are the police force which we had to deal with, and I'm still dealing with, and there's been no resolution. And as a result of our case, we got the entire Kent Police Most Wanted Crimestoppers gallery taken down. It got reduced to 1 page. You can see that on the front page of Windows on the World. This was after I contacted the Chair of Trustees, Lord Ashcroft. And following all this, the National Database of Crimestoppers has been reduced down to 10 pages from about 48 pages. So, in other words, we had about 580 people taken off Crimestoppers because the police were actually abusing the website. This was after 2 PCSOs had uploaded a man's picture and stated he was wanted for a hit and run. Now, this obviously would prejudice trials, and the police in our case were so arrogant. You can see the emails from their Wanted Persons Bureau, tasking and warrants section, that basically we asked about how this would affect a jury trial and what were the mitigating circumstances, and they just told the lawyer to go to kentpolice.co.uk. You can see all that on Police Court Crime Farming at windowsontheworld.net. So here's the interview we did with Matt from Birmingham. So we've done actually 3 shows on what we've called crime farming, and then it's all in the news recently, last few days, that this is now recognised as being a problem. And there's been a big furore about it. It's been on LBC. People have been chatting about it. It's been in the major newspapers because a rape trial actually collapsed because of this lack of defence evidence or withholding defence evidence. Now, we've already reported that in 55.5% of investigated cases by a Magistrates Inspectorate of Constabulary and the Inspectorate of the CPS, that, 55% of all cases examined had essential defence evidence withheld. And this was in our case. We've made 3 shows on this. One was called We Made Most Wanted Criminals Disappear. We've done one called Bent Police, Court Crime Farming, and Police Perverting the Course of Justice. And they cover the whole process, including the abuse of the Crimestoppers website by police and people who have authority to upload the pictures to Crimestoppers. Now, following those shows, I was contacted by somebody who'd listened to the shows, and he had a very similar experience. His name's Matt, and he's from Birmingham, and he's on the line to me now. So, Matt, welcome to Windows on the World.
Hi, Mark. Hi.
Hi. Well, I was very grateful, put it that way, that you contacted me, because I did put out an appeal for people whom this might have happened to, and I'm sure there's many, many others, but your case actually polarises this in exactly the same way that our case did. In other words, that you reported a crime and you wanted to give evidence, and that evidence at the end of the day was withheld or used against you. So can you just tell us what happened?
Yeah, hi, Mark. Hi. I am from Birmingham, and I'm calling you from Birmingham today, but I actually moved down to Kent a few years ago. I moved down to Kent in October 2009. And I got a job working for a large expanding charity in Kent, mainly supporting young people with disabilities. And, I enjoyed a good career down there. I was living in Ramsgate, a great part of the country to live in. And then it was 2011, I believe. Now, I was walking home one night and got into a minor altercation with a car driver. This car driver kind of ran me over slowly on the road, and when we spoke, I could smell that he was a lot of alcohol on his breath. Now, I could see my front door, and so we had a frank exchange of views. And I turned round to go home. I'd never seen this chap before. There was no one else around. It was kind of about 11 o'clock at night. It was rather dark and windy because it was on the seafront. And I heard this chap's car door open, and by the time I could turn round, I was on the floor being attacked by this chap. It was I was in shock. I certainly didn't expect to be in a physical altercation over what had happened. I managed to get this chap off me because I remember being in the road, and he was banging my head off the road. I'm not a fighter, Mark, and I'm not used to being in these situations. So, I was very much in shock. I managed to get up and push this chap away from me, and he continued to attack me. So at that point, I threw a few punches back to get him away from me so I could feel safe. This whole incident, I'd say, was under 4 minutes, probably under 4-minute incident. And then when this chap stood back, he pulled his phone out and rang the police. I don't know much about the law, but I know enough to know that he's then the complainant and I'm the defendant. So I'm kind of doubly in shock that this, what I thought was a drunk driver had driven his car into me, then got out and attacked me, and then phoned the police on me. So do you know what? I just sat down and waited for the police to come. I was outside my house, and I'm not going to, run away. And, I felt that I was the injured party here.
Well, exactly. And this is the point, Matt, because in our case, it was very similar. When the police attended, I just said, come in. And what they did actually really shocked me. But the shock for you came afterwards, really, didn't it?
Well, it did. I mean, quite different to your experience. When the police turned up, they were lovely. They were really polite. They were really courteous with me. They didn't handcuff me. They said, no, there's no need for that. And they were really, nice and courteous. So I got in the car with them, went to the police station. A tiny noting point on this was that the police actually breathalyzed this chap. They breathalyzed him in front of me. And then I went off to the station with the police. So I spent a night in the cells, and then was interviewed the next day, early in the morning. I was interviewed again. The police lady was actually, I felt quite supportive, really. She was fine. So I gave my statement to the police about what had happened. I maybe naively now, I didn't ask for any legal representation because I just thought honesty is the best policy here. Just be honest about what happened. I was. The police lady that interviewed me asked me if I had any injuries, which I did. They were to my scalp, my hands and my knees. And she asked to look at them. And then she suggested that I go straight to the hospital from the police station and get these recorded by a medical professional.
Right, yes.
So I did so, and I did this when I got that done. Of course, for me at the time, working for a large and well-known charity in Kent, getting into a fight like this, whether I'm in the right or wrong, was not good for my career. I was supported by the charity all the way through this.
Sorry, Matt, were you charged at this point? When did they actually charge you?
No, no, I wasn't charged. I was released on police bail. At that point, and I think it was about 2 to 3 weeks later, I was asked to come back to the station, and then I was charged.
Right. That's quite important. So, was this a bit of a shock to you?
Yeah, because oh gosh, as I said, I'm not a fighter. I've spent the past 15 or so years supporting vulnerable young people and families in communities, and so I'm just certainly not used to.
But surely, when you explained this to the police, and you said that you had to use reasonable force to stop him beating you up any further,
yes,
then they must have put this was in self-defence. Did you actually see what they put in? Did you actually witness the statement and sign it, or did they write it for you? I witnessed it and signed it, and I actually said it was self-defence. I mean, yes.
Kind of skipping ahead to when it went to court and Crown Court. Again, I felt a bit naive in this, and this thing like honesty is the best policy. In retrospect, it's I always want to be honest, and we should always be honest in life. But it seems that it just seems like I shot myself in the foot by just being.
Yeah, what did they actually charge you with, Matt?
I was charged with ABH, actual bodily harm.
Right, that is quite serious then. So that is a Crown Court offence.
Yeah. And to be honest with you, Mark, for something that was over with under 4 minutes, which was a blur, and I was very much in shock. I had to think back. I had to think back and think, when was the last time I actually punched someone or threw a punch? And it was like over 20 years ago. It was just such an unusual environment for me to be.
Now, at this point, Matt, did the police inform you that he'd been charged?
Right. What the police did inform me of, the police informed me that he'd failed his roadside breath test.
Yes.
But that because he went to hospital for an X-ray, which turned out to not show any injuries, they didn't take a blood test for another 4.5 hours. And the police told me this off the record, that his the milligram on his blood test 4.5 hours after this incident came just scraped through. And so the police said to me, we know that he was over the limit and drunk in charge of a car when the incident happened, but it's not admissible in court.
Well, that's very strange that they didn't breathalyse him at the time. Is that because he was saying that he was injured and he'd call the police? Because surely, yes, if he'd have described what had happened, and they'd have seen that he was with the car,
yeah,
then and you described that he got out of the car, surely they should have breathalyzed him at the time.
Sorry, they did. I watched them. I observed them breathalyzing him at the time.
Right.
They were breathalyzing him at the time of the incident when the police turned up. And as I got into the police car, I could see them breathalyzing him. And then they told me when I was interviewed the next day that he'd failed that roadside breathalyzer test. But because he had to go directly to hospital for treatment, they couldn't take a statement or give him his second breathalyzer test for another 4.5 hours after.
Right, okay.
And that's just a kind of like a little by the by, really, a little bit of background on what happened.
Yes. So I think we'll take it to the next stage now. You were telling me that you then were interviewed by a police officer.
Yes.
So let's go to that. So we've now gone past the point where you've been actually charged.
Yeah.
So what happened next?
So yeah, I was charged. I was given a court date at a magistrate's court in Margate. I'd actually had some legal advice at this point, because I was earning £500 over the legal aid limit. I wasn't entitled to legal aid. Now, this is how honest I am: is that the director of the charity that I was employed by suggested that she would lower my income by £500 so I could get legal aid.
Yeah.
And I refused to do that. I refused to do that. I didn't want to have any, I didn't want to give anybody any reason to not to trust my word. So I got some legal advice, and the legal advice I got was that I should opt to take this to Crown Court rather than it be dealt at magistrates. And I was actually told to represent myself, or I was given advice to represent myself.
Who advised you?
Sorry?
Who advised you?
I can't remember the name of this solicitor's firm now, but I did a really good round robin of about 10 solicitors' firms in the area and chose the one that I felt I could trust the most. And they just said to keep court costs down, I could represent myself at the first hearing, I suppose, at Margate Magistrate Courts.
Yes.
Yeah. So I went along there. It was interesting actually because I was called, and I suppose this is kind of a side issue here. I was called first on that morning. I was called first, but because I was representing myself, and someone from the court came out and said, "Well, you can represent yourself, but we have a duty solicitor here. And we'd rather you use those." And I said, no, thanks, because I've been given a line to say, basically, I just had to say a statement to the court. And what was interesting was that they made me wait until the end of the day, until everybody again.
Yes, that is interesting because you were representing yourself.
Yeah, and when I went into the court, it was rather interesting because, like where I was living in Ramsgate, it's quite a close-knit area. Ramsgate, Margate, and Broadstairs, quite, like 3 little villages. You get to know the faces. And this duty solicitor, I actually recognise him from my local supermarket and shops and walking around. So it was interesting. And then when I went into the court, he was actually sitting at the back of the magistrates. And it was almost like I'd offended the court by saying that I represent myself. There was a bit of animosity from the magistrates, which, again, I was a little bit shocked at. So I went through this process, pleaded not guilty, self-defence, read out the statement that I wanted to exercise my right to have this case dealt with by the Crown Court. And then I was handed a bundle of like a giant file with all the evidence in.
Yes.
As I said, I've never been through this experience before, didn't know what to expect. Now, when I got home and read through this file, I noticed on a page that it said defendant, and it clearly stated, I think the police report clearly stated that I had no injuries.
Yes.
So I then rang Margate Police Station back up because I was a bit confused at this.
This is interesting, Matt, because if you'd have had a solicitor, you may not have found this out. Because solicitors are, I'm not saying they're part of the process of withholding the evidence. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that the system is actually very, very slack with these things. And we had this in our case. In other words, that I actually passed things over to the solicitor myself, which were never brought up when the court case came up in the Crown Court with the barrister. So there seems to be this kind of, this rather slack attitude with solicitors as well, and that really doesn't help when you've got the police and the CPS basically withholding evidence. So if the solicitor's not on the case, then things can go much worse. And so what I'm saying is if you hadn't represented yourself here, you may have had even further problems at this stage.
Because I may not have, of course, because I wouldn't have known. Okay, so I was sitting at home, so I immediately rang Margate Police Station back, who were dealing with this case, I couldn't understand why this had happened, because the policewoman that interviewed me, as I've said before, actually looked at my injuries and advised me to go to the hospital herself. When I rang, I found out that the case had been handed over to a different female police lady. I kind of stayed on hold for a minute and got through to this female policewoman. And I tried to explain what had happened, explain that I'd just gone to court, that I'd come back, that I'm given this bundle, a legal bundle, which I wasn't really experienced with. But there was a point in here that I'd had no injuries. And this policewoman immediately said, but you didn't have any injuries. And I was like, well, okay, this has been passed on to you. And I explained to her what her colleague said. And then she, I think, became quite belligerent, kind of bordering on aggressive with me. She started to raise her voice, saying that, you know, she can only deal with the information that she's been given. So I just went a bit quiet, to be honest with you. And I asked her one question. And I very, you know, kind of was careful to have an even tone in my voice and not be attacking. But I asked her if she felt that, given the information I was now giving her, had she done her job to the best of her ability in the interest of justice. And she blew up at this
Yes.
point. I was just trying to calm things down but get what I wanted. And she actually blew up and started shouting at me. I was really shocked. So I let her continue to shout at me. And she was shouting at me, how dare you say that I'm not doing my job correctly?
Well, you didn't really accuse her of that, did you?
No.
You were saying that the information wasn't passed on to her.
Yes.
That's what she could have said was, in response to that, was, oh, it hasn't been passed to me, I will go and have a look, rather than going into this other mode, which I'm very familiar with. And this indicates to me that it's part of the process to be doing this. Otherwise, it wouldn't have come up in 55% of cases examined by the CPS inspectorate.
Mm-hmm. Of course. I mean, so I, to be honest with you, I didn't want to get shouted at anymore. And Mark, I'm not used to dealing with the police, and you know, I think we're all brought up to respect authority. And when that authority is kind of being argumentative and raising their voice to you, I think even this, you know, most strongest of us sometimes just go quiet and go little. And I was like, you know, I don't want to be shouted at anymore. I asked her what was going to happen and what needed to happen. And she directed me to go to the hospital myself and to get a copy of the report and to drop it off at the police station. And she said that there was, you know, and after listening to your original interview on the Richie Allen show,
yes,
she then said to me, nothing can happen now. It's gone to the CPS and you've been charged and it's happened, but this now can be included at a later date at trial. Now, you know, I kind of thought straight away, well, hang on, there's something not right here. There's something not right at all. The initial policewoman that had interviewed me had actually said to me that if this chap hadn't had to go to the hospital for an X-ray, which again proved not to show any damage, she said, you'd just be walking out of here now, because there are no witnesses to this apparent crime that have been reported against me. You know, me and the chap have both got kind of like, you know, knocks and bumps from a 3-4 minute tussle on the ground. And I've kind of, again, after listening to you, and this is why I contacted you after the show, is that I really thought that this medical report of mine had been purposely not included.
Well, yes, that's the only conclusion that you can draw from it, because if they'd actually had that in their possession and someone else has taken it over and it's not been passed to them, there has to be a reason for it, because all of this stuff, all of this chain of evidence is incredibly important. When people are given evidence or give evidence to the police, or the police are in custody, they have evidence in their custody, then they have to look after it. And this is what happened in our case. Well, evidence in our case was actually destroyed by them, and they didn't even care that we knew that it was destroyed.
Yeah.
So again, there are parallels, but that does indicate that there's already some kind of misfeasance going on there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah. So it went to, so I opted for it to go to
Crown, yeah.
To Crown Court.
Yeah.
Now, here's another kind of like related side issue here that if anyone's listening, you know, please kind of learn from my experience. Rightly or wrongly, I took the advice to go to Crown Court with my case. I was advised that I had a better chance of receiving justice with a jury rather than magistrate.
This is what we were told as well, and that's not necessarily true at all, because it's really down to the judge and what's put in front of the jury. And this, I think, is a very important point, and the most important point, because in our case, what was put in front of the jury completely skewed the case, which had already been completely skewed by the police and the CPS. In other words, they'd withheld all defence evidence, because I was the only defence witness, and there were no witnesses to the assault. In a way, it's quite a similar situation, but we had terrible trouble trying to get disclosure of anything from the police. So carry on, Matt, anyway, with the court case.
Yeah, so I went to, so I opted for this to go to Crown Court. Now, you know, any of your listeners, please pass this, you know, take this advice and pass on my learning here. Something that I wasn't informed of is that if the CPS deem your case to be appropriate to be dealt with magistrates, but you take your option for it to be heard in a jury of your peers, you are then put on something called a warn list, which I didn't know anything about before. Now, what I found out was that you will never get a court date. You will always be put on something called a warn list.
That's very good, Matt, because that parallels again with what we were with this case we were talking about, because it didn't come to trial for 2 years. And it only came to trial because there was a solicitor involved who wanted to get it off his books. And you're absolutely right. And when it did come to trial, nothing was in place. And the barrister in our case was very ill prepared. And also, I believe strongly, and for very good reason, that she decided that the prosecution were going to win the case. But let's carry on with what happened in your case. So you're on a warned list. And how long was it before it went to trial?
Oh, well, gosh. I mean, if I can go from beginning to end and then go back to the beginning to explain it, this whole, interesting you say that, Mark, this whole process took 2 years.
Yes.
Again. So what was happening was that I had to ring in and my solicitor every day at 5 o'clock to find out if I was on trial the next day. Now, this happened for nearly a year. And I've got to say, the stress that puts on you is just immense. It takes over your life, you know, it really does.
I think this is a great point, Matt, because that's exactly what happened in our case and exactly what happens to other people, and it becomes obsessive, and you start to realise that there's more to it, and it starts to get quite sinister because you start realising that things are being pushed in a certain direction. This is what we found.
Well, all in all, it took a year for it to come to trial, first time. Within that year, the first year, I actually attended court twice before the trial and ended up sitting there all day in Canterbury Magistrates Court waiting for a court to become free. So I was sitting there all day, and then I was told at the end of the day, you've got to go home, which I felt was just, you know, if that's how justice works, then it's not working for us, you know. It was unnecessary and stressful. The first trial ended up being a hung jury, and it was set for a retrial. So that was the first year. I then attended court within that second year. I then attended court another 5 times and spent all day, sitting in the kind of the atrium of Canterbury Crown Court, waiting to be heard. And I didn't. And do you know something, Mark? By the time the actual second trial came round, I think I'd lost all hope. I was emotionally shattered, and I was actually thinking, many a time I was thinking of just pleading guilty to get it all to stop.
Well, this is what the police do. If you are actually charged with something now, they give you a piece of paper, and it said if you plead guilty, you get a third off your sentence.
Yes.
They actually try and push you into doing it.
Sorry for interrupting you, but I was given that every day when I turned up for court.
Yes.
Every one of those times I was given a piece of paper by the security at the front of the court. And, you know, it's just, you know, that proves that justice isn't there for you. You know, it's like, just plead guilty, help us out, even if you're guilty or not. So, so to continue. So I was actually found guilty at this second trial. I must say, though, my barrister made this comment, actually, when we came out of the court. She made a comment to say that the judge's remarks were actually very unusual, in so much that the judge directed the jury in my case to take into consideration that this was a for want of a better word, a small incident. Yes. And that I had, you know, was previously a very good character, and he was almost on my side. Now, I don't know about court, so I just listened to this and didn't have any impact on me. But then when we came out, my barrister said that's very unusual for the judge to say that. He likes you. Anyway, the jury obviously didn't, you know, so I was found guilty. Now, as soon as
Sorry, Matt, were you there for the whole duration?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So I was found guilty. As soon as I was found guilty, I had to resign my post with a charity I was working for. Like, they'd supported me for 2 years through this. And even, you know, I understood, I had quite a senior position in the charity at the time. I was actually Southeast Kent area worker. So I had a massive job. And I know, and I've been in the, you know, the social care game long enough to know that that's it, your career's over. So when I was found guilty, I resigned my position and returned to Birmingham for sentencing. I returned back to Canterbury Crown Court for sentencing. And you know something, Mark, I actually thought I was going to go to prison. It became known to me that I've been found guilty of Section 2 of ABH. It goes from Section 1 to 5, with 5 being the most severe. And the sentencing guidelines were 18 months. And I couldn't believe it. I thought, well, this is bad enough as it is. I'm going to go to prison. And the judge actually ruled against the prosecution and said that he wouldn't be sending me to prison because of my previous good character. And he didn't think it warranted it. So I received, I think it was £500 compensation order, court costs, and 200 hours community punishment.
Did you have to pay a victim surcharge to the bloke who attacked you?
Mark, yeah, I did.
Oh my God!
You know something? That was the worst thing about it, was having to pay this guy for his madness. And you know, it's like, dude, if you're drunk in a car and you have a go at someone, fine, but then please don't carry that on and lie in court. You know, it's just, yeah.
So the jury believed him.
They did believe him. I mean, something actually came up in the court, which I thought, oh wow, this is going to swing this. Was that he got a criminal record and that he'd been convicted of assaulting a 12-year-old boy 2 years previously, and this was brought up in court as well. But I think, Mark, if you know, and again, being honest with you, what happened with this case was that when this chap attacked me, I kind of rolled up into a ball almost on the floor in a fetal position because I was so much in shock that, you know, someone was attacking me over what was happening. And so I covered my head, so to speak. Now, I got severe injuries to both of my knees. I'd broken one of my thumbs, and I had severe injuries to my scalp because my head was being hit onto the tarmac. When I kind of got this chap off me and pushed him at arm's length, and he started to punch me. And then we got into a very, very, very quick kind of punching match. And I think, as I, you know, explained to this when we first spoke, is that You know, I don't go to the gym. I'm not unfit, but I don't go to the gym. I don't box. And I was exhausted. You know, after kind of 15 or 16 seconds of us like kangaroo punching each other, I was exhausted. And when he stepped away from me, I thought, oh, thank God, because I can't fight anymore. But I was, as I said, I was in real shock.
But you were really quite badly injured then. So this is where I think people are going to have a real problem with it and go, this doesn't make any sense. And they'd be actually right, because it doesn't. And this is the shocking thing, that when you deal with these situations and you believe that the police are going to be impartial, and this happens, I mean, it's the message that it sends to you is the opposite of what you've always believed. And I've covered a lot of this sort of stuff before, but in this particular case, in our case, it was, to me, it came across as though what they were doing was just routine, that they always did this, that they always buried defence evidence, and they always created a controversy wherever they could, and they were quite happy to pervert the course of justice. But in your case, if all that evidence was given to a jury, that should really start making people think about jury trials, because it certainly made me think about them, because in summing up in our case, the judge stated that myself and the lady involved, lady accused of an assault, had been aggressive towards the police and told them to leave, which was a complete lie. And when I complained to about the barrister, because there were several complaints I put in about her, which we won't go into, but the point was that they sent back to me the lying police officer's testimony that said that we were aggressive towards the police, and this was the defence. So ours was very, very puzzling on every level. But the problem is it's all about disclosure. It's all about what the police disclose, and it's all also. You said you had a judge who was sympathetic, but they still found you guilty, even though there'd been a hung jury the first time.
If I can jump in here, Mark.
Yeah.
I mean, the difference in injuries was this. This chap had got a black eye, okay? He got a black eye and swelling around his face. And this photograph was produced in court.
Yes.
Now, my barrister, and I'd never had a barrister before, my barrister, I thought she was absolutely brilliant. At both trials, she opened the trial with putting up, and when I heard you on the Richie Allen show again, this is when the penny dropped. She held a picture up of me, which was my, do you call them mug shots in the police station?
Yes. And
then a picture of him at the hospital. I hadn't got a mark on my face because he'd only punched me twice. After we got off the floor and I wrestled him off me, as I said, I was in a fetal position. And then I hit him, and this is it's in the court documents. The police said, "How many times did you hit him, Matthew?" And I said, I can't really remember. I hit him as many times as I'd had to for him to step away. I said it was probably about 12 times. It was literally a blur, and it was seconds. And my barrister held up a picture of his, this chap's face, and he got a black eye and a swollen nose, and a picture of me, and she actually said, a picture tells, what is it? A picture says 1,000 words, but these pictures don't give the truth of what's happened. And now, only after listening to you, I thought, of course. So the CPS, if they've got those pictures of me and him, and there's no other injuries for me, then they're going to go ahead with the case.
Well, that actually parallels what happened in our case as well, because this woman who fell over, who'd accused this lady of an assault, she had a little cut over her eye, but when the photograph was taken, her eye was all swollen up. And nobody there remembers that being like that at the time. And even the solicitors said, well, we have to dispute when these pictures were taken and when the doctor's report was actually done. In our case, ours is well documented through the shows that we've done, so I won't go into that. But yes, this is very, very interesting, because the evidence that's presented to the jury is of paramount importance. And people go, well, I want a jury of my peers. It's not necessarily a good thing. In actual fact, you'd have probably been better off going to a magistrate's with it. What do you think on that?
Yeah. Possibly, yes. I mean, the whole thing about this for me is that, I think, Mark, to be really honest with you, it's, I mean, this, my career has gone through this. My career is over. I've really, really struggled since coming back to Birmingham to get any kind of semblance.
I think this is a really important thing, because people, when they hear things like actual bodily harm, I mean, my friend got charged with malicious wounding, which is absolutely ridiculous, but the charges kept changing. Originally, she was charged with attempting to wound, which turned into malicious wounding. Now, that's really, really serious. That's much more serious than what you were charged with. But when people see that on a police record, the public are programmed to think that you're violent. They're programmed to think that.
Mark, as I've said, I'm quite naive in, legal terms. But, I've given up going for interviews and having to, for managerial positions and having to disclose this, because I've just given up, because the guy had a black eye.
Yes.
He was drunk. The police, the police even admitted that at the roadside at the incident, that he was over the limit. He was drunk. He'd attacked me. He'd hurt me and scared me. I got up and defended myself and pushed him away. And he called the police. And, as I spoke to you before, I refuse to use the word victim at all, but I was the injured party here.
Absolutely.
And like, this chap had a black eye, and when you see AB actual bodily harm, it's like, oh my God. So this has actually been, life changing for me. It really has. And so I've just had another thought. Can I share?
Of course,
this with you?
Yes.
This is. I've just had another thought, and it's funny how the mind works. I was as a teenager, I was beat up and set upon by a chap. As a teenager, I mean, I'm in my mid-40s now, so I don't want you to think that I go through life having rucks and trouble, because I don't. I remember being at the hospital in Birmingham, and the police taking a statement from me, and I started to bleed onto the statement as I was signing it, and I said, "Oh, sorry," and I tried to wipe the blood off, and the policeman took the statement from me, and he kind of like, gave me a pat and a wink, and he said, "No, it's all right, son. That goes down better with the jury." And that's just come into my mind now, thinking about that. So, in terms of the police, I think all of, my feelings that I'm left with now is that the police aren't there for us, Mark. They're there for themselves.
Well, I think that the main thing about all this is that I don't think they really realise when they're crime farming, because that's what I call it. I call it crime farming now, which I think is a good word for it. So, in other words, you're the victim and then you become a defendant. And this is very important, because the impact it has on people's lives is absolutely devastating. And it's happening to a lot of people. And you can actually talk to people generally, and you'll find out that this is not uncommon. It's not an uncommon thing.
Yes. I mean, Mark, for me, it's all about making connections in life. Like, I listen to Richie Allen. I like his show. I heard you on there, and now you and I are talking. Is there any advice that you could give anyone else that has been in a similar situation to us?
Well, yes. I would, in our position, I would have not used a solicitor at all, because then we would have had much better access to the evidence and been able to follow up with the police. Because what happened in our case was, and I'm sure this happens a lot, by the time things come to trial, and obviously yours is a case in point as well, it took 2 years, the same as this case did, that stuff does get lost anyway. And the solicitor, when they hand it over to a barrister, if it's Crown Court, that barrister, if they're on legal aid, if you're on legal aid and they're just getting legal aid for the day, they just quickly glance through everything. So they're not really in possession of all the facts. So I would say that you're better off being very diligent the way you handle things from the start, and really be aware of the abusive process, because the abusive process appears to be where you can make the complaint afterwards, or even before the thing goes to court. And I think that's quite important. That's something we're following up now. But what I've learned from all this is that you have to be wary of the police. And remember that everything you say to them will be used against you. Everything.
Yeah.
They will use everything against you. And also, do not expect them to act honourably. And this is the main point that I found in this is particular to this case, was that the police acted much worse than criminals, because what they did was very subversive and very underhand tactically. Now, I said this to someone in the pub the other night. I said, well, at least if you're in a country maybe like Pakistan, you could just bribe the police. And people would think, that's a terrible system. But in actual fact, when you're up against this level of corruption, it's probably better. And that leaves us in a bit of a difficult situation, because where do we go? I mean, I'm very, very keen to find out whether this is happening to more people than we think. But on a small scale, what I've found is that it's the norm, it's not the exception. This is happening a lot, and obviously 55.5% of cases examined by the inspector at the CPS found that essential defence evidence was being withheld, and trials were collapsing, just like this recent trial that was in the news, because there'd been no disclosure of evidence. Now, these are basic things that if you're involved in this, you have to be incredibly diligent with every little point, because you can't expect the police or the CPS to do anything for you.
Yeah, I've got to agree with you there, Mark. And I think, as you highlighted and in fact made me reflect on tonight, the fact that I represented myself at the initial hearing, if that legal file was passed on to a representative that I was paying, how would I have known or not that the injuries for my hospital report were not included? How would I have known?
Well, you wouldn't. That's the whole point. And if you'd have just left it to the solicitor, then this is what happened in our case. We hadn't even had the audio of the lady's interview, and 2 years later they weren't going to give it to us. It was only the solicitor who went to the Criminal Justice Unit after 2 years and managed to get it. And these are basics. These are your rights. And the police and their legal department and the professional standards and the IPCC have all lied to me. Every single one of those departments have blatantly and openly lied.
Well, Mark, all I can say in response to you is, for any of your listeners that are saying that there is no conspiracy or there is no collusion, just have a look at the Hillsborough case and what's happened there.
Well, exactly, but I mean, this stuff's out in the open, really. It's just there are no conspiracies because they do it blatantly. There was no conspiracy in our case, they just did it. There was a conspiracy between the desk sergeant and the two officers that assaulted me. That was a conspiracy because they destroyed the evidence of the assault. Yeah. But the rest of it was wide open. They just lie to your face. It's very simple. You ask them something, you write to them, and they just lie back to you. And then you call them a liar, and they ignore that as though it's perfectly normal for them to lie.
Yes. Mark, can I ask you, how's your friend getting on now? How's she coping with all of this?
Well, it's very distressing, and obviously she's innocent and doesn't really understand the legal process in this country. So the thing to do is to now go to through a complaints procedure. I'm getting someone to help with that, and we'll probably do a future show on it. But I think that it has a devastating effect on the life of the person, just as it did with you.
Yes, certainly did. Certainly did with me. It did. I mean, in summary, kind of in conclusion,
yes,
it actually helped me to hear your story, and it helped me to, I always thought that what had happened with this document, which had such an impact, was that it was just sheer incompetence. I really did think it's incompetence. It's fallen out of the file. It's not been included. But when conversely, when I heard your story and spoke to you, I actually felt better in a kind of like, juxtaposed way. I felt better knowing that I'd simply fall into an ongoing mechanical trap of the system. It's like, oh right, okay, I feel better for that. So, in a strange way, it's helped me to connect with you and share my experience with you.
No, thanks, Matt. I really appreciate that, because this is a situation where you are a victim. You're being victimised, and there is no actual resolution within the system. The system will not let you resolve it successfully. You have to actually go outside the system to do it. And all of their complaints procedures and the internal processes will send you round in a circle. And also that once you're in that loop, there's no way out until you're convicted. And that's too late for most people. They're then completely, as you say, drained with it all, absolutely in shock, and not in any position to fight back. So that's why we've covered this, because the people out there who it's happening to get completely worn down by it and stressed and psychologically disturbed to the point where they don't feel as though they can go on with anything. I mean, it was bad enough this happening to somebody else, but my rights were violated, which actually made me quite angry about it. And the fact that those police can lie, I just thought, well, I'll call them out for what they are. They're liars. I put all their names were in the public domain of these people, including the chief constable, and he's not responded to anything. I've had these lies that have been sent back, and I've had further lies, and then all of a sudden the lawyer has now got the CD, which has taken 2 years, and that was a legal right. Now, this is a very, very important point. You cannot trust the solicitor to do anything. You have to be on the ball all the time, and I think these cases prove that. And so I think the only way is for more people to get involved in complaining and go to the criminal complaints review and actually start putting in real complaints about it and make the system aware that you know what they're doing.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And as I said before, Mark, at the risk of opening, any kind of unwanted floodgates for you, I urge anyone listening to this to get in touch with you, because it's helped me getting in touch with you to understand what happened to me.
Thanks a lot, Matt. That means a lot, and thanks for being on Windows on the World.
No, Mark, you're an absolute star, and please keep up the good work.
Thanks, Matt.
Join me, Mark Windows, for Windows on the World live every Sunday 9 to 11 p.m. GMT. Check out our archive and programme stream at windowsontheworld.net.